Hi folks, welcome back to my channel, where today I want to talk to you once again about photographing professional football. Now, I did one of these videos last year that was kind of going into the COVID era and talked about the restrictions that were in place around stadia up and down the country as a result of COVID, and as well as some general advice that I put in there about shooting football in normal times. What I thought would be good, as we have now started shooting for the 22-23 season, will be to give a little update to that and kind of bring you up to speed with what things are like in stadia now, what restrictions still exist, and also reiterating some of the tips that are still relevant from the last video. So this is kind of a how to photograph football photography v2.0. Now, obviously the big difference here, and we had this last season as well, when I did this last video, I'm pretty sure fans were not allowed in stadiums or had not been in for a good year or so. Last season, so 21-22 seasons, they were back. And now it feels like we're a year down the road of having fans back in stadia, that clubs have really started to sort themselves out in terms of what restrictions should or should not still exist. So with that in mind, let's now have a look at how to photograph professional football in the 22-23 season. Okay, tip one is still arrive in plenty of time, and I can't underline this point enough. Now, if you're anything like me during the COVID season of 2021, because there's no fans, there was no match day traffic. Because there's no match day traffic, you could park anywhere pretty much. So I was getting to games, certainly home games at the club I shoot. I was getting to there sometimes like 20 to 3, possibly a little bit later on occasions, which is really bad, but I didn't need to beat the rush and get there earlier. So if I didn't need much stock from warm-ups or anything, then I didn't need to have to get there any earlier than that, really, as long as I was there in time to set up and get what I needed to before kickoff. Well, that's now gone out the window, and we're back into the full swing of things, regardless of the tier that you shoot, be it Premier League, Football League, or beneath that into regional and grassroots levels. There's other people going to the games. It's no longer just you and the players and the match officials. There are thousands of fans potentially also looking to get to the stadium early to get parked and get inside. So it's as important as ever, if not more so, to get there nice and early, get in the ground, relieve any stress or prevent any stress by making sure that you're settled and you're set up inside the stadium with plenty of time. Now, in terms of how long, I like to get to stadia ordinarily around 90 minutes before kickoff if I can. Certainly away games where I may not be familiar with the stadium, or you've got things to buy. In the context of away games, I mean, as club photographer for Tranmere, I might travel an hour or 2 hours or 4 or 5 hours for a game. So if you yourself are traveling to either a ground you don't know, or maybe a greater distance than you usually would, try and aim to get there 90 minutes before, or even 2 hours before, so you've got plenty of time should traffic jams or parking issues crop up en route. Number 2 is pitch side positions are back. So the worst thing about COVID, well, no, not the worst thing. The worst thing was obviously the great deal of suffering and tragedy that brought the world. But in terms of sports photography, one of the biggest difficulties of COVID, I thought, was that every single ground, pretty much, you are back behind the hoardings. In fact, not just behind the hoardings, but you're actually in the stands where the fans would sit. And that meant, I know, my monopod slipped one day with my 400mm lens on, because you're on wet steps and things in the stands, and dented the hood on the lens, and another guy who slipped down the steps and dropped the camera. So just the practicalities and general safety of being in stands as a photographer with all the gear was not good. When we talk about shooting photos, the angles were just all a bit weird, because you're either really far back compared to what you would normally be, or you're a little higher up, or you were literally too low down. And I'm a big believer in shooting nice and low if you're doing action sport photography. But in England, quite a few of the stands, the bottom path into the stand at the foot of the first row can sometimes be quite a way beneath pitch level. And so if you're standing there to shoot, you definitely can't sit down because you won't be able to see over the wall. So you stood up, you've got a 400mm on a monopod, you might have your 70-200 around your neck, you might have a wide as well. plus your laptop out. It was a nightmare. So the good news is for 21-22 and definitely now into 22-23, pitch side shooting positions are definitely back. Pretty much every stadium I visited last season, just thinking if there's any exceptions, it was in front of the hoardings or in front of the stands like it always used to be. Some stadiums have got that row of hoardings, so advertising boards between the stand and the pitch, but still have quite a big channel between both. I'm fine to sit behind there and in there, so you've got that separation, you've still got a flat surface to sit on, but by and large, pitch side positions are back, and it is brilliant to be back because you've no longer got any obstructions. You're not got to worry about slipping over. The only things you've got to worry about are what you're insured for, so the ball hitting you or the players falling on you. And let's be honest, we've all had that happen to us at least once, if not several times, when shooting sports. Number 3 is player celebrations are better than ever before. And I think this is like a long tail out of COVID, or the legacy, if you like. During COVID, I don't know if you noticed, maybe if you don't shoot sports that often, or certainly football, players would score, and because there was no fans behind the goals or at the sides to run to, their initial reaction was to turn around and just run back to the centre circle. And the bad thing as a photographer is that you're then making a choice of where to sit. You sit behind the goal to each side to get a great shot of the goals being scored. But if you want a celebration, you're literally better sat on the halfway line at the side, shooting for when the players turn around and run to you. So the celebrations were also pretty muted. They were like, a few high fives, a couple of hugs, but nothing like the passion that we used to. Well, I can safely say that last season, and it's continued this season, celebrations are back to being as crazy as they've been before. I've had players jump past me over walls into fans. I've had them hug over walls into fans, jumping all over each other. Their knee slides back towards the stands are back. All that kind of thing that we didn't see any of really during COVID is back now, and it's just so good to see, because that is the passion that makes for great photos. That is the passion that makes football the game that we all love. So to see that kind of celebration back regularly, it's like a breath of fresh air. So yeah, celebrations are back. I think they're better than probably ever before. All right, number 4 is fans are back. Now, as I said at the start, fans weren't allowed in stadia during the COVID pandemic behind closed doors season. However, they are now back in the stadium, and it is great because it, as well as kind of prompting those types of celebrations we've just talked about, it just makes for a better game. It makes for great fan photos, better than empty seats, which was, we all got carried away with doing empty stadium shots and wide angle shots of empty stadium when those games behind closed doors begun. But by game 3 and 4, we were bored of them, because there's nothing like having fans at the football, both for atmosphere, for photography, and the players themselves obviously want to be playing in front of crowds. So great thing is crowds are back. The only downside to that is watch your gear. I'm not accusing anyone of being likely to steal your gear, but there were several instances, quite high profile in English football, certainly last year, where goals and full-time whistles prompted quite big pitch invasions. And it's not just kind of end the season. I've been at games where dramatic injury time goals have caused fans to maybe not spill on the pitch, but spill out of the stand into that kind of channel between between the hoardings and the stand that I spoke about a moment ago. And I've literally, a couple of seasons ago, there was a game at Rotherham, and I'll throw some photos up here of the celebrations if I can find them. But the goal itself, I basically had a stewards falling on me who were trying to protect or trying to stop the fans running on the pitch. So I kind of was cuddling my cameras and leaning over my laptop like that, trying to protect my gear. While there's fans all around, you don't know who's going to fall on you and kick you and what have you. So yeah, definitely great that fans are back, but watch your gear. It creates great photo opportunities, but it also just presents that little bit of thing that you've got to think about if there is a dramatic goal, or if there's any smoke bombs that are coming on the pitch. You obviously just want to be aware of where they're landing, because as a photographer, I hate to say, you're the last one that anyone's looking out for. The fans aren't really looking out for you. The stewards couldn't really care less about you half the time. the players and the match officials are looking after themselves, as they should be. So if anything happens, if a crowd comes on the pitch, if bottles are thrown, if smoke bombs are thrown, any of that are thrown, it's on you to look out for yourself and your gear. Number 5 is another great positive, and that is that COVID red zones have gone, kind of, almost. So a couple of seasons ago, when I did the last video, I kind of did that diagram where it showed where the amber zone was, which we were all allowed in, which was invariably the stands that had now become the photographer positions. And you had the red zone, which was basically anywhere beyond the hoardings or the stand, where only players and match officials were allowed. So that has massively been relaxed. In fact, in most stadiums I've been to in the last few months, you can walk right the way around the perimeter of the pitch without any problems at all. There are a couple of legacy red zones left over, if I can call them that. Some stadium or clubs kind of did it before the pandemic, but it seems to be some grounds a little bit more fussy over the dugout areas than they ever have been before. So it's always been quite common. I remember shooting at Blackburn loads of times in the Championship 4 or 5 years ago. Once the games kicked off, you couldn't go past the dugout areas. In fact, I think once the teams had come out for the warm-up, you couldn't walk past the dugout. You had to go all the way around the pitch if you wanted to swap ends, which is absolutely fine. What I found now, however, is even if a lot of grounds down in League 1, League 2, even if you're shooting a team that loses a toss and the teams change end before kickoffs, some grounds, not many, but some, honourable mention to Scunthorpe, you can't cross over the dugouts to just skip to the other side. Weird. I don't know if it's a COVID thing or whether it's just a happy upshot of COVID for them. But it's really, really inconvenient as a photographer. In case in point, I mentioned Scunthorpe. So last season, Tranmere played up at Scunthorpe, and I basically positioned myself at the end, well, just the side of dugouts towards the end where Tranmere or the away team would usually shoot in the first half at Scunthorpe. The toss, Tranmere won the toss. I think they changed ends to try and inconvenience the home team. And because Scunthorpe don't allow you to walk back across the dugouts, I had to go all the way around the 3 sides of the ground to get to the opposite end of the pitch where Tranmere was shooting to. While I was doing that, and I'm not the quickest, but I'm not the slowest, while I was doing that, Scunthorpe were awarded a penalty in the first minute. And by the time the foray died down, I just about put my stuff down and got my camera out, ready to see them score and celebrate the opening goal. It turned out to be the only goal of the game, so I pretty much missed getting any good shots of the only bit of action, all because they didn't want to let photographers walk across the dugout. So be aware of it, and that goes back to what I said earlier about arrive at stadiums earlier, or as early as possible. Ask stewards and other photographers who shoot there frequently what the rules are in terms of where you are allowed and where you aren't, because if there's something like that, it just pays to know and be aware of it. Loads of stadiums during COVID had this, and a few pre-COVID had this, like Port Vale, I'm pretty sure that's all been relaxed now, and actually, save for the odd couple, so I think Scunthorpe, Crawley might have been another one if you're a League 2 shooter. Most of the grounds now let you walk right around the pitch and past the dugouts, as long as you're not standing in the dugout or between them, being a nuisance. If you're just quickly passing through before kick-off or whatever, that isn't a problem. So anyway, in terms of the rest of the red zones, the tunnel areas, if you go up the tunnels, are sometimes still red areas for teams or for clubs. Although your lanyard and your accreditation would usually have whether you're allowed up there or not. Again, not exclusively the case. I think Sutton United last season, as an example, towards the end, you literally come down the tunnel as a photographer. You go in the media entrance and you're shown through a little room which has got a couple of lovely local members of staff giving you sandwiches and cups of tea. But then you go out the players' tunnel to reach the pitch. So it literally is club by club. But overall, red zones have definitely been relaxed, and life is much, much easier on match day. And last but not least is number 6, and this is that there is more competition than ever before, or certainly that's what it feels like. And coming out of COVID, as we go into the 22-23 season, both at pre-season friendlies and the first league games, I've noticed more photographers at games, and it was a trend that was carrying on from last season, really. Now, whether that's because during lockdown, more people have taken up photography or have signed up for agencies to do photography work at matches. But sometimes even for rubbish League Two matches, you've got 3, 4, 5 agencies there, if not more, which in the realms of Premier League and Championship football is very little at all. However, in terms of a comparative look at it, you sell very few photos at League Two level. And if you're shooting for an agency, you want to be the only agency there. The reality is last season there was, sometimes 3 or 4 agencies at the end when we were shooting in home games, which I found bizarre, because if any of those guys are shooting on spec, they've got no chance of selling photos really, because the few publications that will buy a League Two action photo, it's a 1 in 4 chance if there's 4 agency guys there that they're going to buy. Also, a lot of local papers will use club photographers to get their images as well. So for example, if you're a southern club playing up north, often the local newspaper will ask the club photographer to send images, or vice versa, the club will use a newspaper or agency photographer. So basically there's not many travelling photographers now. There are a load of local agency guys though, so it's very competitive. And if you're wanting to sell your photos and you're working on spec rather than commission, best of luck. Try and look for games that look the most unattractive. And for example, if you're shooting in the northwest of England, try and find a day when Liverpool or Everton are at home, United and City, one of those two are at home, and then look at the clubs in the Championship, League One and League Two, and hope that lots of northwest teams are at home in the chance that may deter a few rival photographers, if you will, from also attending. So that's it. They're the main differences between 22-23 season and I guess what I did before, which would have been 2021 season, I think. I hope you found it useful. If you want more kind of information, update videos about what it's like to shoot pitchside in the EFL and possibly the Premier League, which I might well return to this season, and now my accreditation is all sorted, then let me know. I'd love to do whatever videos people find interesting. So yeah, I'd love it if you could subscribe to my channel, but if not, no worries, and I'll see you on the next video.